The professor who rejected John Kennedy. Where is she now? John Kennedy sat in the quiet comfort of his Baton Rouge home, the late afternoon sun filtering through the tall windows of his study, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. The air was thick with the scent of old books and polished wood, a sanctuary of sorts where he often retreated to escape the relentless pace of his Senate schedule. Today, though, was different. No meetings, no phone calls, just a rare moment of stillness. His 19-year-old son, James, was sprawled on the couch nearby, scrolling through his phone, the faint hum of music leaking from his earbuds. John had been sorting through a dusty cardboard box, one of those relics of the past that had been tucked away in the attic for years when he stumbled upon it, his high school yearbook from the late 1960s. The cover was faded, the edges worn, but the sight of it sent a jolt through him like opening a door to a room he hadn't visited in decades. He ran his fingers over the embossed title, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. James. He called his voice warm, but tinged with something softer, almost nostalgic. Come here a sec. You gotta see this. James looked up, pulling out one earbud, his brows raised in mild curiosity. What's that, Dad? Another old law book. He pushed himself off the couch and sauntered over his sneakers, scuffing lightly against the floor. John chuckled, shaking his head. Nah, something way more interesting. My senior yearbook. Want to see what your old man looked like before he was well old? James grinned, plopping down beside his father on the leather armchair, the box of forgotten treasures between them. John flipped open the yearbook, the pages crackling with age, revealing a world of black and white photos, handwritten notes, and the earnest optimism of youth. The first few pages were a blur of familiar faces, classmates who'd become lawyers, doctors, or faded into the quiet rhythms of small-town life. John pointed out a grainy shot of himself in a debate club photo. His tie slightly crooked, his hair meticulously combed. Look at that guy, he said, laughing. Thought he was gonna take over the world. James leaned closer, squinting at the photo. Man, Dad, you look like you were about to argue with the principal for fun. John snorted, turning the pages slowly, each one stirring memories he hadn't touched in years. He passed the sports section, football players posing with puffed-out chests, cheerleaders in mid-jump until he reached the faculty section. And there she was, Sarah Mitchell. The name hit him like a punch to the chest, stopping him cold. Her photo stared back at him, frozen in time, a young woman with sharp eyes, a confident smile, and an air of quiet authority. She wasn't just any teacher, not to John. She was the professor who'd turned his teenage world upside down. His finger lingered on the edge of the photo, tracing the outline of her face. And for a moment, he wasn't a senator, wasn't a father, wasn't a man in his 70s. He was 16 again, standing in the crowded hallway of his Louisiana high school, his heart pounding in his chest. Dad James's voice snapped him back to the present. You okay? You're like staring at that picture like it's gonna talk. John blinked, clearing his throat, the weight of the memory settling over him. Yeah, I'm fine. Just someone I knew back then. James tilted his head. His curiosity piqued. Who is she? One of your teachers? John nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on Sarah's photo. Sarah Mitchell. She taught English, but she wasn't just any teacher. She was different. James scooted closer, sensing a story. Different how, like she was your favorite or something? John let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. Not exactly. Let's just say she left an impression. James wasn't letting it go that easily. Come on, Dad. You're acting all weird. What's the deal with her? Did you, have a crush on her or something? John's laugh was louder this time, but it carried a hint of something else. Regret, maybe? Or the ache of a long-buried memory? A crush? Nah, it wasn't like that. I was just a kid and she was, well, she was Sarah Mitchell. He leaned back in the chair, the yearbook resting on his lap, and for the first time in years, he let himself go back to that moment, the one he'd never told anyone about. Not his wife, not his closest friends, not even himself in the quiet hours of reflection. But something about this moment, James's wide-eyed curiosity, the stillness of the house, the weight of the yearbook in his hands made him want to share it. "All right," John said, his voice lowering as if the story demanded reverence. "I'll tell you. But don't go thinking this is some big romantic drama. It's not. It's just something that happened." James grinned, settling in, ready for whatever his father was about to reveal. John took a deep breath, his eyes drifting back to Sarah's photo. It was my junior year. I was 16, maybe 17. I wasn't anybody special back then, just a skinny kid with big dreams and not a lot of confidence. I was good at debate, sure, but I wasn't the guy everyone noticed. Not like the football players or the class president. And Sarah, she was this young professor, probably in her mid-20s, fresh out of grad school. She had this way about her, smart sharp, like she could see right through you. Everyone respected her, but everyone was a little scared of her, too. She didn't let you get away with anything. He paused, the memory sharpening in his mind. I was in her English class. We were reading stuff like Shakespeare and Faulkner, and she'd push us to think harder, to argue better. I liked that. I liked how she made me feel like I could be more than just a kid from Louisiana. But I was still a teenager, you know, full of dumb ideas. And one day I got it in my head that I was going to do something bold. Something to make her notice me, not just as a student. James's eyes widened. "Oh man, Dad! What did you do?" John rubbed the back of his neck, a sheepish smile creeping onto his face. "I asked her out. Not like on a date, but there was this school dance coming up and I thought, I don't know what I thought. That she'd say yes, that she'd be impressed by my guts." James burst out laughing, clapping his hands. "You asked your teacher to a dance, Dad. That's legendary. What did she say?" John's smile faded, his expression softening. "She said no. But not just a quiet no. It was public." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, the yearbook still open to Sarah's photo. It happened after class, one day. I'd stayed late to turn in an essay and most of the other kids had already left. I was nervous, sweating through my shirt, but I figured it was now or never. So I walked up to her desk and I said, "Miss Mitchell, there's a dance next week. Would you maybe want to go with me?" John shook his head, chuckling at his younger self. I can still see her face. She looked surprised at first, like she wasn't sure she'd heard me right. Then she smiled, not a mean smile, but one of those smiles that says, "Oh kid, you're in over your head." And then what James asked, hanging on every word. John sighed. She didn't say anything right away, but the door was open, and a couple of seniors were still in the hallway, waiting for their ride or something. They heard me, and before Sarah could even answer one of them, Tommy Baxter, star quarterback, starts laughing. Loud, like the kind of laugh that echoes. Sarah looked at me, and I could tell she felt bad. She said, "John, that's really sweet, but I don't think that's a good idea. I'm your teacher." Her voice was kind, but it didn't matter. Tommy and his buddies were already spreading it around. By the next day, half the school knew. John Kennedy asked out Miss Mitchell. Kids were whispering in the halls, snickering behind my back. I wanted to disappear. James winced. "Ouch, that's rough, Dad." John nodded, his gaze distant. It was. I felt like the smallest person in the world. I avoided her class for a week, made up excuses to stay home. But you know what? It wasn't the end. It hurt, but it made me tougher. Made me realize I had to keep going, no matter what people thought. James studied his father, his usual teenage sarcasm replaced by something softer. So that's why you're so chill about stuff now, like nothing phases you. John shrugged, a small smile returning. Maybe. That and a few other knocks along the way. The room fell quiet. The only sound the faint rustle of pages as John closed the yearbook. James looked at Sarah's photo again, his brow furrowing. So what happened to her, Miss Mitchell? You ever see her after high school? John leaned back, his hands clasped behind his head. That's the thing. I didn't. Life got busy. College, law school, politics. I never looked back. She was just a memory, one I tucked away. But seeing her picture now... He trailed off, his voice thoughtful. I wonder what her life's been like. Where she ended up. If she's still teaching, still changing kids' lives the way she changed mine, even if she didn't know it. James grinned, nudging his father's shoulder. Dad, you're John Kennedy. You could probably find out in like 5 minutes. John raised an eyebrow, considering it. You think I should? James laughed, standing up and stretching. I think you're already gonna do it, whether I say yes or no. John shook his head, but he was smiling. His son knew him too well. That night, after James had gone to bed, John sat at his desk, the yearbook open beside him. He stared at Sarah Mitchell's photo, her confident smile pulling him back to that humiliating moment in the hallway. But now, with the perspective of years, he didn't feel the sting of rejection. He felt curiosity. Who was Sarah Mitchell now? What had life taught her, and what could she still teach him? He opened his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, he hesitated, the weight of the past pressing against the possibilities of the present. Then he typed her name, Sarah Mitchell, into the search bar and hit enter. The screen filled with results, but none seemed to fit. He tried again, narrowing it to Louisiana, then to their high school. After an hour of digging, he found something that made his heart skip a beat, a small article from a local newspaper tucked away in an archive. Local professor honored for dedication to underprivileged students. The name jumped out at him, Sarah Mitchell. She was still teaching, still fighting for kids who needed her most. But what he read next would turn everything he thought he knew about her and himself upside down. John Kennedy couldn't tear his eyes away from the laptop screen, the dim glow illuminating his study as the house settled into the quiet of late evening. The article about Sarah Mitchell was brief, barely a few paragraphs, but it hit him like a freight train. Local professor honored for dedication to underprivileged students. The headline read, and there she was, Sarah Mitchell older, now her hair streaked with gray, but with the same sharp eyes and quiet confidence he remembered from high school. The photo showed her standing in a modest classroom, surrounded by a handful of children, their faces lit up with smiles as they held handmade posters. She was leaning on a walker, her posture slightly stooped, but her presence radiated a kind of strength that transcended the years. John leaned back in his chair, the yearbook still open beside him, Sarah's youthful face staring up from the past. The contrast between the two images, one, a vibrant young teacher, the other a weathered but determined educator, stirred something deep in him. He needed to know more. He scrolled through the article again, piecing together the fragments of Sarah's life. She was a professor at a small public school in rural Louisiana, a place called Bayou Elementary, tucked away in a community where poverty clung to every corner. The school served kids from families who scraped by children of farmers, factory workers, and single parents working double shifts. Sarah had spent over 3 decades there, teaching English and life skills to students most people overlooked. The article mentioned her recent award, a local recognition for her tireless commitment, but it also hinted at something heavier. Sarah was battling a chronic illness, though it didn't specify what. Despite this, she'd never missed a day of teaching unless absolutely necessary, often staying late to tutor kids or prepare lessons. One quote stood out, attributed to a colleague. "Sarah doesn't just teach these kids, she fights for them. She's their advocate, their cheerleader, their second mom." John felt a lump in his throat. This was the woman who'd said no to him all those years ago, and now he was beginning to understand why. He opened a new tab, his fingers moving almost instinctively as he searched for more. Bayou Elementary's website was basic, clearly underfunded, with outdated graphics and a sparse staff directory. Sarah's name was listed under the faculty, her title simply English instructor, no frills, no accolades. There was a brief bio stating she'd earned her master's degree in education from Tulane and had been with the school since the early 1970s. No mention of a husband, children, or personal life, just her work. John dug deeper, pulling up local news archives, school board minutes, anything that might paint a fuller picture. What he found painted a story of quiet heroism, but also of struggle. Sarah had been the driving force behind a literacy program for at-risk kids, one that taught not just reading, but critical thinking, public speaking, and self-respect. She'd funded much of it herself, buying books and supplies out of her own pocket when the school's budget fell short. But the program was in trouble. Budget cuts were threatening to shut it down, and Sarah had been fighting a losing battle to save it, attending school board meetings, writing letters, rallying parents. The most recent article, dated just a few months ago, said the program was on the chopping block, unless a miracle happened. John clicked on a photo gallery linked to the article, and the images hit him harder than the words. There was Sarah sitting at a desk with a young girl pointing at a book, her expression patient and encouraging. Another showed her at a school event, handing out certificates to students, her walker tucked discreetly to the side. In every picture, she was surrounded by kids, some with disabilities, some shy, some beaming with pride. Their adoration for her was palpable even through the screen. But there was something else in the photos, something John couldn't ignore. Sarah looked tired. Not just physically, though her illness was clearly taking a toll. It was a deeper kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying a burden alone for too long. He zoomed in on one image, her hands gripping the walker, her knuckles white. Yet her smile never wavered. She was still fighting, still showing up, still believing in kids the world had written off. He pushed back from the desk, running a hand through his hair. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but sleep was the last thing on his mind. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just a memory anymore. She was a living, breathing force, someone who'd taken the path he hadn't even known existed back in high school. He thought about that day in the hallway, the sting of her rejection, the laughter from Tommy Baxter and his friends. At the time, it had felt like the end of the world. He'd been so caught up in his own embarrassment, his own small teenage universe, that he hadn't considered who Sarah really was. She wasn't just a teacher turning down a kid's awkward invitation. She was someone with a purpose, someone who'd already set her sights on something bigger than a school dance or a fleeting moment of popularity. Her no hadn't been about him. It had been about her, about the life she was destined to lead. John stood and paced the room, the yearbook catching his eye again. He flipped it open to Sarah's photo, the young professor with her confident smile. He'd been so quick to assume her rejection was a judgment on him, a sign he wasn't good enough. But now, seeing what she'd become, He realized it was the opposite. She'd said no because she was meant for something else, something extraordinary. And yet the articles told another story, one of a woman who'd given everything and was now facing the collapse of the very program she'd built. He stopped, pacing, his mind racing. He wasn't that 16-year-old kid anymore. He was John Kennedy, a senator with resources, connections, influence. He could do something. The question was, should he? He sat back down, pulling up the school's contact page. The principal's name was listed, Margaret Hayes, a woman who'd been quoted in the article praising Sarah's dedication. John hesitated, his hand hovering over his phone. It was too late to call, but the idea was taking root, growing stronger with every passing second. He didn't want to just send a check or make a grand gesture. He wanted to understand Sarah's world, to see it for himself. He wanted to know if the woman who'd shaped him, even in that brief, painful moment, was still the force he imagined her to be. He opened his email and began typing a message to his assistant, Laura, asking her to gather information on Bayou Elementary, its budget, its challenges, its needs. Keep it discreet, he wrote. This is personal. As he hit send, John felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease. He was stepping into something he didn't fully understand, driven by a memory that had lain dormant for decades. Sarah Mitchell had changed his life once, not by saying yes, but by saying no. Now he wondered what she might teach him this time. He closed the laptop, the yearbook still open on his desk, and stared out the window into the dark Louisiana night. Somewhere out there, Sarah was still fighting her quiet battles, unaware that her past was about to catch up with her. And John, for the first time in years, felt the pull of a purpose he couldn't quite name. John Kennedy woke early, the faint hum of Baton Rouge stirring outside his window as dawn crept over the horizon. His study was still the yearbook and laptop, exactly where he'd left them the night before, Sarah Mitchell's name echoing in his mind. The email to his assistant, Laura, had been sent in the small hours, and by morning she'd already replied with a detailed report on Bayou Elementary. The school was in worse shape than the articles suggested, crumbling infrastructure, outdated textbooks, and a budget stretched so thin it was a miracle the doors stayed open. Sarah's literacy program, the heart of her work, was slated for elimination by the end of the term. The numbers were stark, on $150,000 a year to keep it running, a drop in the bucket for someone like John, but an insurmountable hurdle for a rural school board. Laura had included a note, Principal Hayes is expecting your call. She's discreet as requested. John stared at the report, his coffee growing cold. This wasn't just about money. It was about Sarah, about the kids she fought for, about a moment from his past that refused to stay buried. He picked up the phone and dialed Principal Margaret Hayes. His voice steady, but laced with an urgency he hadn't felt in years. "This is John Kennedy," he said when she answered, the words carrying the weight of his name. There was a pause, then a cautious Senator Kennedy. "My goodness, how can I help you?" John kept it simple. "I read about your school, about Sarah Mitchell's program. I'd like to understand the situation better. Can we talk?" Margaret's voice warmed, but there was a hint of disbelief. "Of course, Senator. Sarah's our cornerstone. Losing her program would be devastating. But may I ask why you're interested?" John hesitated, then said, "Let's just say I knew Sarah a long time ago. I want to help, but I need to see it for myself. Can you arrange a visit?" Quietly. Margaret agreed, her tone shifting to gratitude. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Sarah's always there early. She won't know you're coming." John thanked her and hung up, his mind already racing toward the next step. The drive to Bayou Elementary was a journey through time, the Louisiana back roads winding past fields and clapboard houses that hadn't changed much since his youth. John dressed down jeans, a plain button-up, no tie to avoid drawing attention. The school came into view, a low brick building with peeling paint and a playground that looked more tired than inviting. Margaret met him at the entrance, a wiry woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense air. "Senator, this is an honor," she said, shaking his hand, "but I'll keep it low-key as you asked. Sarah's in her classroom. She gets here at 6:30 every morning to set up. Says it makes the kids' days smoother." John nodded, following her through the dim hallways, the faint smell of chalk and cleaning solution stirring memories of his own school days. They stopped outside a classroom adorned with colorful drawings and motivational quotes taped to the door. Through the small window, John saw Sarah, her walker, propped against a desk as she arranged books and worksheets. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, but her focus was absolute. A few early students were already there, chattering as they helped her organize supplies. Sarah's voice carried through the glass, gentle but firm. "Lila, let's put the pencils in the blue bin." "Okay, you're doing great." The girl, maybe 10, beamed with pride. John watched, struck by the quiet magic of the scene. Sarah wasn't just teaching, she was building something, a space where kids who'd been overlooked felt seen. Margaret whispered, "She learns their names the first day, knows their stories, their struggles. Half these kids come from homes where no one's got time to read to them. Sarah's their lifeline." John knotted his throat tight. He noticed Sarah wince as she reached for a book, her hand trembling slightly before she steadied herself. The illness was there, visible in her careful movements, but so was her resolve. She knelt slowly, painfully, to help a boy with a worksheet, her smile unwavering. "Look at that, Jamal," she said, pointing to his writing. "You're getting the hang of it. Keep going." The boy grinned, his shyness melting away. John felt a pang remembering how Sarah's kindness had softened her rejection all those years ago. Even as a young teacher, she'd cared about how people felt. Margaret led him to a small office where they sat across from each other at a cluttered desk. "So, Senator," she said, her eyes searching his. "What's your interest in Sarah? You said you knew her?" John leaned back, choosing his words carefully. "We went to high school together. She was my teacher for a year. Left an impression." He didn't mention the dance, the rejection, the laughter that had followed him through the halls. That was his story, not hers. "I read about her program, about the budget cuts. I want to help, but I need to know what she needs, not just to save it, but to make it better." Margaret's expression softened. Sarah's been fighting for these kids for 30 years. The literacy program isn't just about reading. It's about giving them confidence, a future. Losing it would break her heart and theirs. "We need funding, yes, but also teachers, resource, a space that isn't falling apart." John listened as Margaret laid out the details. The program served 40 kids, most from low-income families, many with learning disabilities. Sarah had built it from nothing, scrounging grants and donations, but the school board saw it as expendable. "She's been to every meeting," Margaret said. "Speaks up, writes letters, organizes parents. But she's one woman, and she's not well. The stress isn't helping." John's jaw tightened. "What's wrong with her?" "The articles didn't say." Margaret sighed. "Lupus. Diagnosed about 10 years ago. It's manageable some days, but it's getting harder. She won't take leave, though. Says the kids need her." John absorbed this, picturing Sarah's trembling hands, her walker. He'd spent his career fighting battles in Washington, but this, Sarah's solitary fight, felt more real, more urgent. He stood glancing toward the classroom. "I want to do something, but I don't want her to know it's me. Not yet. Can you help me set up something to honor her? A way to announce the funding without making it about me?" Margaret's eyes widened. "You're serious about funding it?" John nodded. Permanently. And I want to expand it more. Kids, more teachers, whatever she needs to make it a model for other schools. But I want to see her program in action first. Can I come back tomorrow? Sit in quietly. Margaret smiled, a rare softness breaking through her practicality. Absolutely. She'll be here. Always is. The next morning, John returned, slipping into the back of Sarah's classroom as the day began. The room buzzed with energy, kids reading aloud, working in small groups, Sarah moving among them like a conductor. She used her walker, but never let it slow her. When a shy girl stumbled over a word, Sarah knelt beside her, ignoring the obvious pain it caused. "Take your time, Emma," she said. "You've got this." The girl tried again, her voice stronger, and when she got it right, Sarah clapped, her face lighting up. The kids fed off her enthusiasm, their confidence growing with every small victory. John watched unnoticed as Sarah transformed a cramped, underfunded classroom into a place of possibility. He thought of his own teenage self, crushed by her rejection, and realized how small that moment had been compared to what she was doing now. By the time he left, John knew what he had to do. Back in his car, he called Laura. "I need you to set up a foundation, something for rural education. Name it after Sarah Mitchell. We're funding her program permanently, and we're going big. More staff, better facilities, a blueprint. Other schools can follow. And I want to announce it at an event, something that honors her without making it about me." Laura's voice crackled with efficiency. "Got it, Senator. I'll start the paperwork. When do you want the event?" John thought of Sarah's trembling hands, her unwavering smile. "Soon," he said. "She's been fighting alone long enough." As he drove back to Baton Rouge, the weight of his decision settled over him. This wasn't about righting a teenage wrong or proving something to himself. It was about recognizing a woman who'd spent her life saying yes to the kids who needed her most. Sarah Mitchell had changed him once, not by accepting him, but by showing him what it meant to stand for something. Now he had a chance to stand for her. John Kennedy stood in the wings of the elegant ballroom at the Baton Rouge Marriott, the low hum of anticipation filling the air as guests settled into their seats. The room was a sea of faces, teachers, parents, local officials, and most importantly, the 40 children from Sarah Mitchell's literacy program at Bayou Elementary, their eyes wide with excitement. The event had been meticulously planned over the past 2 weeks, disguised as a district-wide celebration of educational excellence, with Sarah as the unsuspecting honoree. John had worked with Principal Margaret Hayes and his assistant Laura to ensure every detail was perfect, from the catered dinner to the student performances. A large screen at the front of the room displayed a looping slideshow of Sarah's classroom kids reading, laughing, holding up their handwritten stories, all under her patient guidance. John adjusted his tie, a rare nervous habit, and glanced at the envelope in his hand. Inside was the announcement that would change Sarah's life and the lives of countless children forever. But more than that, it was his chance to rewrite a story that had started with a teenage rejection and ended with a lesson he'd only now come to understand. Sarah sat near the front, surrounded by her students and their families, looking slightly uncomfortable in the spotlight. She wore a simple navy dress, her gray streaked hair neatly styled, but her walker was tucked close, a reminder of the lupus that had shadowed her for years. Her students, oblivious to her unease, chattered excitedly, some clutching programs they'd helped design. John had insisted the kids be involved, knowing how much it would mean to Sarah. They'd spent days preparing a short skit, a tribute to their teacher complete with readings from their favorite books. As the lights dimmed and Margaret took the stage, John's heart thudded. This was it, the moment he'd been building toward since that night in his study, when Sarah's name had pulled him back to a past he'd long buried. "Good evening, everyone," Margaret began, her voice steady but warm. "We're here to celebrate a remarkable educator, someone who's spent over 30 years proving that every child deserves a chance to shine. Sarah Mitchell has been the heart of Bayou Elementary, not just teaching our kids to read, but teaching them to believe in themselves." The crowd applauded, the students cheering loudest, and Sarah shifted in her seat, her cheeks flushing. She hated attention, John knew, but tonight was about more than her comfort. Margaret continued, her tone growing emotional. "Sarah's literacy program has transformed lives, giving kids who've been overlooked the tools to dream big. But as many of you know, that program has faced challenges. Tonight, we're not just honoring Sarah, we're ensuring her work lives on." The students' skit followed a heartfelt performance that brought tears to half the room. A shy girl named Emma, whom John had seen Sarah coach in the classroom, stood at the microphone and read a poem she'd written about her teacher. "Miss Mitchell makes me feel like I can do anything," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "She never gives up on us." Sarah wiped her eyes, her smile radiant, and John felt a pang in his chest. He remembered that smile from high school, the one that had softened her rejection, making it clear she wasn't dismissing him, but protecting something bigger. Now, watching her with her students, he saw what that something was. Margaret returned to the stage, her expression shifting to one of barely contained excitement. "Before we present the Excellence in Education Award, we have a special guest. Someone who knew Sarah long before she became the hero we know today. Please welcome Senator John Kennedy." The room erupted in applause, a murmur of surprise rippling through the crowd. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide, and for a moment, their gazes locked. John stepped into the spotlight, the envelope in his hand, and felt the weight of the years between them. He wasn't a senator tonight. Not really. He was just John the kid who'd once stood in her classroom, heart pounding, asking for something he wasn't ready to understand. "Hello, Sarah," he said into the microphone, his voice steady but warm. "It's been a long time." The crowd quieted, sensing something personal in his tone. Sarah's expression was a mix of shock and curiosity, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. John smiled, turning to the audience. "Most of you are probably wondering how I know Sarah Mitchell. We went to high school together back when I was just a scrawny kid with big dreams and not much sense." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. "And I've got a story to share, one I've never told anyone until now." He paused, glancing at Sarah, who looked like she was bracing herself. "When I was 16, I got it in my head to ask Sarah, Miss Mitchell, my English teacher, to a school dance." The crowd gasped, then chuckled, the tension breaking. Sarah's face turned pink, but her eyes never left his. "I stood there sweating through my shirt and asked her to go with me." John continued, his tone light but earnest. "And Sarah, being the kind and professional person she was, said no. Not quietly, mind you, because a couple of loudmouth seniors overheard, and by the next day the whole school knew." More laughter, but John's voice grew serious. "At the time, I thought that was the worst thing that could happen to a kid. I thought rejection meant I wasn't good enough. But I was wrong." He looked directly at Sarah, his words carrying across the years. "Sarah didn't say no because I wasn't enough. She said no because she was meant for something bigger, something more important. She was meant to say yes to kids like the ones sitting here tonight, kids who needed her to believe in them when no one else did." The room was silent now, every eye on John. He held up the envelope, his voice steady. "Sarah, you taught me something back then, even if I didn't understand it at the time. You taught me that real success isn't about getting what you want. It's about becoming who you're meant to be. And you've spent your life doing just that. He opened the envelope, his hands steady. That's why I'm here tonight, not just to give you an award, but to make sure you can keep doing what you were born to do. The John Kennedy Foundation is proud to announce the creation of the Sarah Mitchell Center for Literacy and Learning, fully funded forever. The crowd gasped, then erupted in applause, the students cheering wildly. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. John wasn't done. This center will not only save your program, but expand it, serving twice as many kids with new teachers, better resources, and a facility that matches the brilliance of what you've built. It'll be a model for schools across Louisiana and beyond, sharing your belief that every child matters. He paused, his voice softening. And Sarah, you'll have access to the best medical care for your health. You've spent your life taking care of others. It's time someone took care of you. The applause was deafening now, but John raised a hand. His eyes still on Sarah. Most importantly, this is about your legacy. The way you've changed these kids' lives, that's what we're sharing with the world. You're not just a teacher. You're a hero. Sarah was sobbing openly now, her students crowding around her, hugging her, their joy spilling over. John stepped off the stage, weaving through the crowd until he reached her. She looked up, her eyes, red but bright. "John," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why?" After all these years, he knelt beside her, his voice low. "Do you remember what you said that day in the classroom? It's not a good idea. You were kind even when you didn't have to be. You've spent your life being kind, fighting for kids who needed it. I just wanted to make sure you could keep going." Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." John smiled. "You don't have to say anything. Just keep being you." Later, in a quiet corner of the ballroom, John and Sarah sat alone, the noise of the celebration fading into the background. "I still can't believe this," Sarah said, clutching a tissue. "You didn't have to do this." John leaned back, thoughtful. "I did, though. Not because of that dance, but because of who you are. You changed me, Sarah. Not by saying yes, but by showing me what it means to stand for something." Sarah's eyes softened. "Can I ask you something? Do you ever think about what might have happened if I'd said yes?" John chuckled, considering it. "I used to, but now I know the truth. If you'd said yes, you might not have become the Sarah Mitchell who changed all these kids' lives. You might have gotten caught up in my world instead of building your own." Sarah smiled, tears welling again. "So my saying no was the best thing I ever did for those kids." John nodded. "And maybe for me, too. It made me tougher, made me keep going. But more than that, it led us here. Today, the Sarah Mitchell Center for Literacy and Learning serves over 100 students with branches in 10 states. Sarah still teaches training educators and advocating for underserved kids, her health carefully managed. John's foundation has expanded the model globally, but the real legacy is the lesson their story teaches. Rejection isn't an ending, but a redirection. Sometimes the people who say no are opening doors to something greater, pushing us toward who we're meant to be. Sarah's no didn't break John, it built him. And her yes to her students built a legacy that will outlast them both. The takeaway is simple but profound. Life's rejections are often life's greatest gifts, guiding us toward our true purpose. For those listening, the call is clear: embrace setbacks, as opportunities support those who lift others up and live with the courage to make a difference, one kind act at a time. Sarah Mitchell didn't just teach kids to read. She taught a senator and all of us what it means to truly win.